spend the morning talking about 5 points, and we're going to go through the rest of the afternoon and dive deep into systems thinking and walk through sort of the 5 points of one. We're going to start with these 5, front and back of the house. We're going to take a look at linkages, how to unpack them, how to bring them back together, knowing your ocean, and finally looking at big levers. All right, so let's take a look quickly what we mean by front and back of the house. So how many of you have gone to a performance before? I've seen like a show, whatever it is, and you sit down and you see this amazing, whether it's a musical or a ballet, and you're like, oh my goodness, this is such a beautiful performance. Like I wish I could like see it again. But what you don't see is, and this is a pic, and we love this picture because this is like a backstage view of the audience. Of like, all right, there's all these crazy madness of everyone trying to get into place and making sure that like all the actors are in the right place, all the props are in the right place. And that's what you guys don't see. All the craziness that happens that puts on this beautiful show that you sit there sort of absorbed in it for the next like 2 hours or so. And that's one of the very sort of like big knowledges that we like to do about when you're thinking about building your product or building your business. There's a very, very big distinction and line between what your customers see and what your customers experience versus everything else that goes on in your organization, what you do to get prepped. So like for this event in Magic, for example, what you guys are experiencing is front of the house. It's what the entire Magic team has put on. But what you don't see is all the crazy all-nighters that they have been pulling for the last 2 weeks to make sure that like, all right, we got to think about, we got to get all these people in the room, make sure sign-ups are done right. And that's back of the house stuff.
And signage.
And signage, yes, and signage. Yeah, it's like all these little things. And when we talk about front of the house and back of the house, it's not only just about what the customers see and what you do as an organization. There are multiple layers of interaction. So the very, very first one is sort of right on top, is where the action is what you tangibly actually experience in real time. So when you walk into a store, you purchase something. That is the customer line of action. You come to Magic, you sit down, you are in a workshop. That is what you actually experience. And there's also a line of interaction between the employees. That's the second layer behind it. Sort of like, oh, if you have to sign up for something, you have to interact with a Magic employee and they tell you, here's your advanced track pass. And that's when you start getting a little bit more into the back of the house stuff. And then finally, there is a line of internal interaction between the team, which you guys don't see at all, is the Magic team thinking about, okay, how do we even put on this event in the first place? What are the countless of nights that we're sitting and planning together? All the different systems and all the different loops that you guys probably experience and don't even notice, but is important to make sure that this entire event goes smoothly. Yes, sure, go for it.
So a really great analogy for this is if you go to a dry cleaners. You go to a dry cleaners, you drop off your clothes and you're unhappy because you have dirty clothes. You go away for a day or two and you come back and you have clean clothes. You hand it to the company and they do something and then they give you back clean clothes. You have no idea what happens in the middle. There's a line of visibility, right? And you don't care, but you can change that line of visibility and change the business, which is really interesting. There's actually ways of just dropping off clothes in a locker in your basement. There's some companies that do this where you just drop off the clothes. We've moved it all the way to the front of the house. There's no back of the house anymore. There's also situations if you've ever gone to a restaurant and you sit at the chef's table, you get to basically be in the kitchen. They take that line of visibility and they drop it all the way down. And you get to see everything that goes on. And that's a really interesting thing to play with the business. What's visible versus what's not visible. Do I show how the sausage gets made? It can actually change the user experience significantly.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the more important points to think about when you're talking about front of the house versus back is be very intentional about separating out what your customer pathways are and what your organizational systems of delivery are. Those are two very distinct things. And here we show, this is where the customer action is. So like Daniel said, the customer action is you go to your dry cleaners, you drop off your clothes. That is your line of action. That is very different than actually putting the laundry into the washing machine and that you can actually see someone doing that. So there you go, that's the backstage. That is what happens behind and back of the house. And it's very important to also understand like which one supports what. So you imagine like a theater performance. So let's say you go and watch The Lion King. Like I know as the stage prop manager that I have to make sure that all of the props that my performance and that the lion costumes have to be in place. And so the zebra costumes have to be in a certain place so that when the actors come off the stage, they know exactly where to go pick them up and change and go back out to the stage as well. That will be very, very different from the actual like orchestra people where they're sitting there, you don't see them and they provide music and you just experience that. That's a very different system from the costume prop manager. And finally, and that was exactly what I was explaining, like those are the internal processes that you don't see, that way, way back of the house, there's someone doing lighting. There's someone that has gone through all the processes to make sure, all right, I'm gonna make sure in this scene when he meets Timon and Pumbaa that there's going to be a certain light that shines on them, and that's what you guys see, but that's a totally like backstage process.
This diagram, by the way, is called a service blueprint, if you Google that.
Yes.
All these are lanes of action, lanes of visibility. Mm-hmm. Putting together a service blueprint for what you're trying to make in the world really helps clarify your system map in a very different way.
Mm-hmm. And
oh, yeah. Oh, well, this is actually really appropriate because I'm currently wearing Bonobo's pants.
You have awesome pants.
Thank you very much. So Bonobo's is it's a website, right? It's a website where you can go and buy pants. They started with pants, and then now you can wear shirts. You can buy shirts and all sorts of things. And but they went from just being an online business to, if you want to hit the next slide, to having lots of offline touch points. So they started as a pure digital business. Then they had other customer touch points. They have a paper catalog now, which is kind of interesting for what was like a pure digital business. And they also have try-on rooms. They have a couple in the city, in New York City now, where you can go and it's like they don't have a real store, but they have a touch point where you can go and experience the clothes, try things on, and then order them online. It's like a half store.
Can you order it while you're at the store?
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
You can.
If you can access the internet, which they have for you. And they also, one of the things that they do, which is really amazing, is they have this back of the house system that allows amazing customer service. They call them ninjas. And they have real people who will email you, who will be helpful to the ends of the earth with every challenge you're having. They make it super easy to do returns and exchanges online, but they have people and a very complex system to track and organize whether or not me as a customer is getting the best out of their company. And they have, completely separate from the website. A lot of people are like, oh, I want a digital business, I want to build a website. There's all these other touch points in the back of the house and in the middle of the house that help create an amazing experience for people. And we just don't see those at all. Similarly, if you go to like Amazon, all of the back-end systems, tracking packages, making sure that the 5 things you ordered all get shipped in a reasonable amount of time in the same box even. Like all those are back of the house systems that go into making a great experience, which we normally don't think about, but it's important to do so.
And just to emphasize the point I just made earlier, customer pathway, organizational system of delivery. Those are 2 very distinct experiences. All right. And they should be designed. Yes, of course. So that's principle 1 of systems thinking, understanding and differentiating between front and back of the house. The second one that we want to talk about is how do you unpack linkages? We just talked about distinguishing between systems and understanding the linkages between front and back of the house, but now we're going to talk about like unpacking it. And this is a really sort of simple diagram where I think we had talked about in the earlier example about coffee, about there is a cycle and link of if you go to sleep late, you're going to be tired in the morning. And when you're tired in the morning, you're going to get to school late, or you're going to get to your job late. And when you get to your job late, you're going to get tired because you have so much other stuff to do. And you go to sleep late because you try and catch up with it. So it's like this never-ending, infinite loop of like tiredness and misery. Yes, exactly. So what I want you guys to do is take a look at this and tell me how can you unpack this very simple system? Which point, what link would you break to create the most change in this simple, sort of tired, going to school late system? Going to sleep early, absolutely. That's yeah, correct. And that's the simplest thing, right? Whenever you look at a system, you think to yourself, all right, there's something wrong with this system. How can I look at this and say, all right, what is the link that will create the most influence that I can break that will immediately influence the rest of the system? And going to sleep early is like the correct one, because if you break it at getting to school late, so let's say you break it and you say, okay, let's just try and get to school early. But that just doesn't work, because even if you get to school early, you're still tired because you're going to sleep late. And this is a very simple illustration of the bigger point. Like, know where to break your linkages. And this is correlating to a second point of subsystems. Within any system in itself, and this is the whole point of systems thinking, is like a systems thinker will always think about, if I'm breaking something, what other subsystems are interconnected to this? So you just told me, all right, we're going to break the link that we're going to go to sleep early. Well, what? What? That you don't need to go to school if you sleep early?
Yeah, you sleep late, you need to go to school late, get off the things.
Interesting. Okay, good. Yeah. Whether that's legitimate, that's a separate issue, but yes, that's true. What is another subsystem if you go to sleep early? What could happen in your life?
Stuff not finished.
Right, so your work could be affected if you are on a night shift or something. Great. Another thing. One more? Anyone? Maybe you don't get all your work completed on time. Maybe you have housemates and you have to change everyone's system to fit your own like sleeping patterns because all your housemates like go to sleep really late and they're not allowed to have guests over. That could be a sub-linkage that you're not thinking about. The biggest thing about systems thinking and the way to become a systems thinker is that whenever you have a problem, you don't just solve that problem at hand. You think about, what is the bigger system that I'm influencing? And we just talked about this. Where can we change this linkage? Dan, do you want to talk about unpacking linkages? Or I can, oh, this is on me. All right, great. This is still me. Great. So an example of this, which I really like, is Amazon. So this is an example, actually, Jeff Bezos, who's the CEO of Amazon, like this is actually a sketch from the Amazon website. And this is how they think about linkages and customer delivery. So you can see right here, their whole main focus is growth. And what they care about is that linkage of growth and getting customers. Ooh, goodness. I think so. Growth of getting customers to influence lower prices. And lower prices means more customers. And lower customers to them means more growth. And that is a closed system. That is their linkage. That is what they care about. And then the other customer experience as well is like they drive traffic, they offer more products on their website, and then they offer more selection, which means that enhances the customer experience. Every time you go on Amazon, they're the everything store. You can purchase books, to clothes, to whatever it is, shoes that you want. And this is a linkage that they have provided. They are very clear about what the customer experience is. So.
Sure.
Oopsies.
So what I want you guys to do is grab a partner in a respectful way, obviously. Get a partner, and I want you guys to have a quick conversation. Those of you who are here in the morning, which is most of you, know about open-ended questions, right? And having silence and asking for stories. What I want you guys to have a quick dialogue about, and we'll check in with you guys, is this question: have you ever tried to change a system and found unintentional consequences? Have you ever made a change and that change did not have the effect you wanted it to, or did it have an unintended change, right? It's like when you try to smooth out a carpet and there's just a lump that you just can't get out. So I want you guys to have a little dialogue with somebody adjacent to you, and we'll check back in and see if we can't derive any principles about unpacking linkages from some of the things that you've learned. What did you guys talk about?
Basically, I'm the one asking that question. So what I found is shit does happen.
Yes, it's true.
So what my partner does to change his system is he had a job previously where he think he was not happy. So he changed his job to another job that which he think he will be happy. But then shit happened, he's still unhappy. And then he tried to change the system again.
It's funny, often we try to change jobs and we think that it's the job that's the problem and not our approach to the job potentially.
Yes.
Yeah, so in this case it's like you're changing the wrong thing, I think.
Yeah.
So remember what we talked about before with the sleep thing. If you change the wrong thing, the system is still going to be intact. It's only going to be shittier. So shit happens, yes.
Anyone else? What was your conversation about? Yeah.
Well, it was about workspaces.
Okay.
So we had our workspaces were disrupted in a way. We had to work from home. And then a bunch of other problems popped up.
So you moved from working in the office to working at home, thinking it would change what?
Well, actually, what happened?
Okay, so I think sometimes we have flexibility to work from home.
Yes.
Okay, you may have a repairman come over and say, okay, let's work from home and get the job done, and I'll have the repairman done, right? So what happened was you have to monitor the guy, and it takes like 6-7 hours to get the job done, and it's like ends up like, okay, this does not work. You might as well just take the day off and just do one thing at a time.
What you're talking about is like underestimating the impact of a secondary influence, right? There's like, oh, so the primary thing, it's like you think that there's this process and I'm gonna be able to show up here and forget that there are multiple touch points in the middle that you have to address, right? And so that's like overestimating, or rather underestimating the amount of attention you need to give to a process, which is really amazing.
Is there anyone from this side that would like to share? Yes? Yeah, sure. Yeah. All right, so you go to work, you're bored, okay. Right. Okay. Right, so you are, and what did you try and change to make work more interesting? So you're looking for another job. What was the unintended consequence of that? Did you talk to me a little bit more about that link? Right, so it's more of the lack of purpose rather than the job itself, right? So actually identifying the right variable, right? Great. Anyone else who would like to share? Someone from here? I know you guys had great conversations. Anyone? Yes.
We offer a discount to a customer in hope that they will increase the order, but sometimes they will think that it's old stock or something that they rather not buy extra.
Right. Awesome.
Extra discount. For him, this case, he sells house burn last time. So when we offer an extra discount on top of that, the clients sometimes think that it's old stock that they are trying to clear. So they turn out to buy. And giving price discounts, I think, damage your equity as well. So we tend not to give too much discount. Sometimes it's backfire.
Yes, totally. I actually really love the example because I think of a company that where the entire system kind of fell apart is Groupon. I don't know about Malaysia, but in the US and especially in Canada, Groupon was super hot. I want to say about two years ago. 4 years. I'm like, when was Groupon like hot? Like 4 years ago. And you guys all know the premise of Groupon, right? You go to a vendor and you get like super awesome discounts, like whether like it's 50% off a meal or like 70% off this spa treatment or whatever it is, and you buy the coupons online. And the hope is that the vendor themselves will get more business. But the unintended consequence of that is that typically vendors that sign up for Groupon are small and medium businesses that want to attract more traffic to their websites, either to their retail websites, either to their like physical product or service. But what happened in the end is that all these coupons, all these coupons had an expiry date. So all of these malls, like I think for example, one of my favorite like retailers that sells like facial products in Vancouver in Canada just became absolutely overwhelmed for a period of 1 month where all sold out. All the inventory was sold out. Like the customers, every single customer that came in that tried to buy a new facial wash was, hey, what's going on with all of your inventory? They just couldn't handle the magnitude of the orders. So then what they tried to do in the end is, then they were like, oh my goodness, we have so many orders this month. Let's restock for next month. But then the thing is, the coupon had already expired at the end of the month. So the next month after that, they had all of these extra inventory that was sitting there. And the customers, all they cared about in the end is this discounted price. And they were like, okay, well, why should we go and buy when we already bought a product the month before? And then the vendor is sitting there with a whole ton of inventory and no repeat customers because customers at the end of the day only cared about the price. So there was a very huge unintended consequence for SCOA, is the name of the company.
You have to be so careful with discounts. It can make people devalue your offering.
Absolutely.
They can use it for something you just did not intend at all. Clearing out old stock versus buying something new.
Yep.
Yes. Okay. So we're passing out some paper right now. We're going to do an exercise. We're going to do some origami, but we're going to do it with our eyes closed. You have to bear with me. I'm a huge origami nerd. I spent the better part of ages 6 to 16 doing a lot of origami. And actually sometimes teach origami as a way of teaching user experience design, so we'll do that with another time, which is super fun. But when you get a piece of paper, what we're going to do is, yes, we're passing it down now.
Blank A4 paper, so it's being passed down.
Yes, if you don't have a piece of paper, please raise your hands. We will get you a piece of paper. Okay, does that mean everyone has a piece of paper? Okay, now this is the honor system. I can't go around and actually look at everybody's face. But I want you guys to close your eyes. Okay, have a piece of paper in your hand and close your eyes. Okay, relax your eyeballs. This will not work if you have your eyes open. Okay, so everyone have a piece of paper in their hand? Everyone visualize something, anything. Eyes closed, safe space. All right, now I'd like you to take that piece of paper and I want you to fold it in half. Just fold the piece of paper in half. This is a folding exercise. Fold the piece of paper in half. Now I want you to take a corner and pleat it. Get a good pleating. Pleat the corner. You just have to interpret pleats as best you can. Pleating it is like a dress. A dress has pleats. Pants have, bad pants have pleats.
Or like a fan.
Like a fan. Pleat it like a fan. Take a corner and pleat it like a fan. I love it. Beautiful. You guys are doing a great job. Pleat that corner.
Don't cheat the look.
Yeah, don't fucking open your eyes. Be fair. Be cool, alright? Alright. Stop pleating the corner. Now take another corner. And I want you to just fold it down and just tear off that corner. Just tear off that corner. So remember, if you can see step 2, look at step 1 again. Step 1 is close your eyes. Step 2 is, if you can see this, read step 1. Step 1 is close your eyes. All right.
I don't hear corners being torn.
Yeah, I don't hear any torn corners.
Where is the cheering?
Take another corner, fold it, and then tear it
Don't
off.
be afraid to tear your corners.
Yes. Okay. Who's torn a corner? Good. Tearing. I want to hear tearing. There we go. Okay. Now, when I teach origami to incredibly large groups of people, the best way that I know to monitor how everyone's doing is to have everyone take their piece of paper and hold it up high. So you can all open your eyes now. Everyone hold your piece of paper way up high. And I want you to look around. Look at your part, look at the people on either side of you. Okay? Do we all have the same thing right now? Are we different or are we the same? Different. What happened?
Bad instructions.
Bad instructions. What are you trying to say? I thought this was a hierarchical Asian culture. You're not allowed to tell me I'm a bad teacher. I gave you very bad instructions.
Picnic is a very bombastic word.
What's that?
Let's start with that first.
Yeah, thank you. The first question you asked was landscape or portrait.
Yeah.
We actually left diagonal out completely. Did anybody fold a piece of paper in half diagonally? Anyone? Of course it's possible.
You can fold the paper any way you want.
I didn't say in half equally. I didn't say landscape. I didn't say sideways. Let's look at your pleating. Which corner did you guys pleat? Some of you didn't even know what I meant by pleating, right? I didn't tell you how many times to pleat. I didn't tell you how many. So she pleated hers 3 times. You pleated your whole model. Look at this. You pleated the whole damn thing. And that's cool. It's okay. You over here, you did a tiny little pleat. 2 pleats, 1 little corner. Nice folding in half, though. So, in accordance to my instructions, did he do a good job? Yes, good job. Right? Here we have, again, where half of it is pleated and 1 corner is taken off. What was your experience like during the folding process? You were nervous. Why were you nervous?
There was a lot of ambiguity.
A ton of ambiguity. And I didn't let you know that it was okay to be ambiguous. Am I doing it right or wrong? Did anybody else have that feeling of like, what, WTF, like what's going on here? Right. This happens all the time. Now, what are some simple things I could have done to rectify the process? Let you open your eyes. Why would opening your eyes help? You can see what you're doing. There's a feedback loop, right? Vision is a feedback loop, right? So I could have provided you with a coordinated touch point, right? So I could let you guys open your eyes. What else could I have done? What's that? Also, what was in the back? I could have demonstrated it. If your eyes were open, I could have had a piece of paper as well and be doing the things for you, right? Which is usually how I teach origami. Yes, right? What else could I have done? Answer your questions. That's another feedback loop. I could have answered your questions. If you said landscape or portrait, I could have been like, oh, right, landscape. That's, of course, assuming that I knew.
That is different in the way that people communicate with each other in terms of touch points. So in a line of command, on the right-hand side for the little army man, your touch point is with your superior. That's it. That's how you receive your instructions, that's how you deliver your work, and that's the end of the line and the touch point.
Jocelyn, can I just add, when I was drawing this, it's something I sort of really didn't think about before, which is that there's no communication. The bottom of command on one side, the bottom of command on the other. Yep. There's actually no conversation. Another way we could have had the origami work better is if I allowed you to like share with the person next to you or with the person behind you. Compare, like, oh, what did you think about that? Great. When I used to teach origami to kids, I would say in school, if you copy from your partners, your other people's pages, that's called cheating. In origami, we call it sharing. Right? It's okay. Like, people be like, oh, am I doing this right? I'm like, well, look who's next to you. Does your piece of paper look like theirs? And if they're like, no, then I'm like, what should you do? I should make it look like this. And that doesn't happen in a lot of organizations, right? There's not that conversation between different parts of the organization.
Exactly. So one of the sort of different methodologies that we like to talk about is when you're in creation of product, what does it mean to be in a waterfall environment versus an agile environment? some of you who work in the tech industry might have heard these terms before, but it kind of is what the pictures are showing you, which I will walk you through. So on the left-hand side, waterfall means, like, how does a waterfall work? You have a pool on top, there's water there, it runs down to a next level, all the water pours down, and then you have like a collection point, and then all the water pours down into another collection point. Or maybe you have a single point of waterfall where all the water just comes down and there's a huge amount of churn right underneath, and that's it. And when you compare this to creation of products, so let's say you've been told, let's launch this mobile app, and your boss tells you, let's just build this new travel mobile app. And you have a waterfall product development where there are absolutely no touch points. You touch point with your superior right in the beginning, and then they're like, go forth into the world and create this for me. 2 months later, you show up and you're like, ta-da, here you go, here's your app. And you show up, and your superior says, that is not what I had in mind. And that's exactly what happens in the waterfall. There's a lot of churn, there's a lot of miss at the bottom. Because it's and the higher that you go without actually touching and like breaking the flow, the more churn there is going to be on the bottom. The risk becomes higher. Versus an agile environment, where in this picture, Daniel chose it because he's a smooth dancer, is that what I love about agile environments is that you have to be agile. I don't know like another synonym for the word agile, but you have to be agile. And what I like about this picture is that you still have to be grounded at the same time. So the guy is the center of gravity, and the girl has to be nimble enough that she can read sort of his lead, and he's pulling her throughout the air and like swinging her and spinning her around. But there's still a very real sense of groundedness, and that's the touch point in an agile environment. And you might ask, well, why would I ever create a company to have a waterfall type environment versus agile? Because shouldn't every single company be agile? And the answer is, well, it depends. For some companies, you kind of have to go with a waterfall type environment, because especially for large infrastructure, CapEx industries, for example, if you were the CEO of General Motors and you had to create a car, you certainly cannot have an agile environment, because the cost of manufacturing and producing one part and shipping it to the next factory, which would then assemble the car, that will have to fit in all the electronics, that will have to do the paint job, that will have to distribute it to the customer. All of those touch points are very expensive, and this is where good management comes in. Understanding, all right, if I'm producing X amount of electronics for my car, I need to know that what is the most strategic way that I can cut through that waterfall in order to make the churn less at the bottom, that the final product of this car is going to be beautiful. Versus, and this is where like software companies have an advantage, is that they can have the ability to be agile, because they don't have to spend millions of dollars creating a huge factory to create physical products. And it differs according to the different type of industries or startups that you guys are trying to create. So, yes.
Yeah, you work with 3D printing.
Yeah.
Right. So, have you done 3D printing or use it for iterative drug development?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. So I started a 3D printed men's fashion brand like 3 years ago.
I'm just going to talk real loud. Sorry, everybody. And one of the things that's helpful about 3D printing is there's no minimum order quantity, so we never had to go to tooling. We have to spend a lot of money on building a giant tool to see what it would look like. We could actually prototype in the final material, right? So we can actually print in steel. This is 3D printed steel, right? We can print this and get it back and see what it looks like, photograph it, and then put it on the website and sell it. Right? So for that, we actually don't have to print plastic. Now, the minus of that fidelity, that high fidelity, is the time cost. Because it takes about 2 weeks to get a 3D printed product back in steel. So it took us maybe 3 years, but we finally decided to buy a resin printer that we can have in our offices. So it's about $3,000, and you can print really quickly, and the level of fidelity and tolerances are similar to that of steel.
It's a little bit better than a MakerBot, which has a very low resolution, very large lines in the print. Formlabs is resin, so it's very smooth, so it looks similar. The plus of using a Formlabs printer, there's the cost of buying the box, but the plus is that instead of waiting 2 weeks to see if something's going to look right, looking at it on your computer is not the same thing as holding it in your hand. The scale, the size, the measurement can look right on paper, and when you hold it in your hand, the mass is wrong. Right now I'm teaching undergraduate industrial design students portfolio. And some kids bring stuff in on their laptop, and like, you have to print it out. And they're like, wow, well, it looks different when it's on paper, right? If somebody's gonna look at your portfolio on paper, you gotta prototype it and see what it's gonna look like on paper. So that fidelity is really helpful. And with 3D printing, it's great to be able to get it in the real material, but 2 weeks is sometimes bad if you're like, oh, I have to change this one thing, you change that one thing, you get it back, oh wait, there's another thing I need to change, 4 weeks, 6 weeks. So now we can do much quicker iterative times.
And you just make such a great point, Daniel, that touch points are not only about communication, but also product touch points. Because someone may have a very, very different vision of what the product will look like in the end, if you just show it on paper or if you just do a quick sketch, versus the ability to communicate that. I think it's important to distinguish and unpack both of them. Make sense?
I agree.
Great, awesome. So here are a couple of sort of tips in order to create touch points within your company or within sort of your groups that you're working with and startups. The very first one, which is very simple, but something that people often forget is two-way listening. I feel like everyone knows this as a principle, but sometimes it's really easy to forget, especially when in design thinking we like to talk about, like in the very first session, know your users, speak user. Two-way listening is not only about listening within your organization, but also listening to what people are saying outside of your organization. What is the front of your house telling you that the back of the house should listen to, and vice versa. It is, yeah. It's two-way listening. It's not only within your team. The second one, which is actually like my personal favorite in agile environments, is having stand-ups. And this is the communication touch point that we talked about. And what stand-ups are is every single day you have to stand up with your team, 5 to 10 minutes, everyone stands up. That is the principle. No one should sit down because it creates a sense of urgency because human beings tend to want to sit down. So you make everyone stand up and you huddle together. So like in the morning, Daniel and I will huddle and be like, all right, what did you do yesterday? What are you working on today? What am I working on today? All right, great, done. We start our day. And that way, it's a very quick, all right, especially when you're iterating on a product together, you know exactly where the other person is at, and that person knows where you're at. So you create, as going back to the waterfall example, very, very little, like you try and minimize the amount of churn and froth on the water at the bottom.
Do you guys use, I'm not a user of it, but do you guys use Trello at all? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, Trello,
Asana.
Yeah. There's so many ways to share what you're working on with other people.
Mm-hmm.
I think still, though, having that physical, like that co-presence where you say, what are you working on? What's in your way? What do I need help from? That direct feedback loop is so important.
The final sort of tip is something I think that people often mistake or bundle together is having a touch point that's a planning touch point versus a tactical touch point. Oftentimes you think about projects when you launch something, the vision of what you have and you plan together a project. So let's say the Magic team came together 3 months ago and you're like, all right, we're going to plan this academy and it's going to look like this. And Cheryl has this amazing vision. And she's like, amazing vision. And it's going to look like all of these, like I want to have these speakers on, and I want to have like this number of days, and I'm going to have these startups at my career fair. The probability of that exact vision 3 months ago probably would not, like I would be so impressed if you actually hit 100%. And the importance of why I bring that up is because you probably went away, so they probably had their very first meeting and had, all right, this is the initial vision, we planned it. And the team all had their own tactical sort of to-dos for the week. And they all went away and did something. And teams often forget to come back again and do a step back. Maybe it's the next week, maybe it's 2 weeks later, but step back and actually say, wait, do we still actually believe in the vision, in the original vision that we're trying to build? Or are we on track? Are we totally off track and we realize, oh goodness, like this entire academy is, we cannot do this in 3 months. We need 5 months later. So that shifts the entire planning timeline. Like having meetings that separate out the tactical and the planning is super important. And the point before about stand-ups is a brilliant way to do tactical check-ins.
I'm just going to have one more thing that's actually not on here, which is something I learned from Etsy. They do something called pre-mortems, right? They do pre-mortems and post-mortems, right? Yep. They do a no-blame post-mortem. At the end of a project, they sit around and say, did we actually meet our goals? And if not, why not? They don't blame the person, right? They ask what systems weren't in place to allow that person to have success, right? Now when you talk about a pre-mortem, you go and you say, how might we screw this up? Right? Knowing ourselves, knowing our team, knowing the way we approach things, what are some ways that we have our vision? What are some ways that we could fail to meet our vision? Right? So that's looking all the way at the end and saying, here's our ideal state. What can we do to anticipate common forms of failure? Right? And we're going to talk a little about that more with scenario planning later on, but I think it's really important in terms of like connecting touch points, beginning and end touch points, and then time-based touch points where you can't just say, okay, everybody, we want these 5 things, and then check back at the end of those 3 months. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, and one of the things that I love about the analogy of this sailboat is that it's kind of like a startup. When you're on the shore, everything's pretty safe. You get all your materials together, you build something, hopefully you end up with a boat, maybe you end up with like a little sort of kayak, maybe you end up with a raft, but whatever it is, you still need to set it afloat. You still need to test whether it would actually float or will it actually just sink and disintegrate the minute it touches the water. But in the chance that it actually does float and you actually go out into the world, like there are so many different things in the ocean. Like Daniel spoke about, like we teach problem solving, like creative problem solving, but there are so many different types. And all these currents and tides are coming at us and we need to be able to navigate through those waters. And we have this conversation like pretty frequently of like, well, what else is happening in New York that we know that it's a really awesome workshop and then we need to know that it's actually coming. One of the examples that we'd like to talk about is scenario planning, in which sort of like very similar to what Daniel has described before about pre-mortems. Basically asking the question, what could happen in the future that has a probability of happening, and how can we prepare ourselves for it? So the picture that we have up here is sort of the OPEC oil crisis in 1973, when OPEC, like the main oil producers in the world, banded together and they decided they were going to raise oil prices. And this is actually a sort of a quick picture of all these cars deciding, oh my goodness, I need more gas, I need more oil. So you're all crowding around a gas station trying to fill up oil because like gas prices has like doubled and tripled in price. But one of the brilliant things, and this is Shell's company, I'm sure you guys are familiar with them, is that they have a phenomenal scenario planning team. That even before the oil crisis happened, the team itself, every single year will sit themselves down and look out into the world and say, what could possibly happen this year that we have no idea about? Like Saudi Arabia suddenly deciding that they're not going to export any oil at all, to, oh, maybe OPEC and all of these oil-rich countries might band together, or our tanker might sink off the shore of the Gulf, and we have huge PR risk. They have all of these scenarios planned out and a contingency plan to address each of these scenarios. So Shell was actually the only oil company when the OPEC oil crisis happened in 1973 that actually managed to come out on top. All the other oil countries, BP, actually lost a significant amount of money because they did not hedge their bets and did not actually look out into the ocean and see, what are the tides? How am I reading these tides and currents that are coming at me? And how are they actually gathering in momentum? And it's such a wonderful example because Shell is such a huge corporate company. I know that you guys are in startup land. But if a large corporate company can actually sit down and take the time and understand what is coming at me in the world, how can I actually sort of weather the storm and get this? So a great example is not Airbnb, but the actual sort of hotels of the world. So I think about a hotel in San Francisco. A good scenario planner, if you were running like an exclusive hotel in New York, would be like, I'm seeing this small little startup out of San Francisco called Airbnb that might spread to New York City. And this is probably about 3 years ago. But what should I actually do if they actually do come to New York and actually capture a huge marketplace? Like, what would happen to my business? How do I actually now position myself in the marketplace, given that the tides and currents are changing? That's a very simple way of doing a pre-mortem and doing a scenario of what could happen in the future. Finally, the last principle is finding big levers. I love this picture because it's very indicative. So it's sort of like the little triangle is a fulcrum. And it's really important to see, like, understand where this fulcrum is being placed. Because the closer it is in terms of like being placed at the stone, the larger the movement that you actually have to pull down and have an increasing amount of effort. It's very simple, right? Like the closer the fulcrum is, the harder it is, or the heavier the rock, the harder it is to actually pull down. And one of the things that you need to think about is the startup that you're actually doing, how can you actually fundamentally change the landscape that you're in? Or what ultimate problem are you trying to solve? It's very easy to just sort of do like, oh, like, I think this is a really interesting idea. I think this is a really interesting demand. I think it might happen. But actually going to the root of the problem and say, all right, what levers in the marketplace am I seeing that this is an actual problem that I'm trying to solve? Uber, for example, they're solving a problem of mobility. They're solving a problem of quality of transportation. That is the lever that they're pulling at right now. I feel like there are so many companies that I think goes back to someone's comment earlier of mission and vision, that there are a lot of startups that just create things, but they don't actually understand what is your mission. And by mission is sort of how are you actually influencing the marketplace and build capacity. So the bigger the capacity, obviously, and the bigger the change and the bigger the landscape you're trying to influence, the harder it is. Like, that's just reality. If you're trying to create a startup to solve world hunger, like, that's going to be really hard. But if you're just trying to solve hunger in your neighborhood, in a community, and start a food bank, and start normal like food collection and distributions, that's a lot simpler, and that's starting from a much lower scale. So going to back to that picture of these guys, if you're right at the end, that's solving world hunger, right there. And if you're the guy right in front, that's solving a food shortage in your small community, and that's a lot easier. So, as an example, let's take a look into Amazon. I love Jeff Bezos. I think that he's a wonderful visionary. He's an amazing CEO. Slightly sort of out there and very strong and will-powered. I would highly recommend that you guys read his recent book, The Everything Store. But let's take a look at Amazon and the e-reader market, essentially the Kindle market. And the sort of like colored content is the levers that Amazon had to pull when the Kindle came out in 2007 in order to increasingly influence that marketplace. So the first one being, even before 2007 actually, Jeff Bezos had a vision of the Kindle back in, I want to say 2003 or 2004, when they decided, wouldn't it be awesome if we solved the problem of reading? And that if everyone had a really light device, they can just have all these books that they bought on Amazon and had it on their e-reader. And it would be super easy to swipe through. And in order to do that, he knew that he not only had to create the technology in order to do it, using electronic ink, he had to have some ability in order to actually have a wireless way of downloading and syncing books, which actually was not invented yet. And third, he knew that he had to meet the supply issue of, wait, if I launch this Kindle device and there are no books for people to download, how do people even like use this device in the first place? So actually, like when the Kindle launched, Jeff Bezos made sure that there were at least 100,000 books that have been translated over, and really, really pushed the levers of the publishing company, of the publishing landscape, in order to make it happen. One of the things that I like about this is if you see this sort of like in 3 sort of columns and timelines, is the more, increasingly with time, the more influential he became. The graph sort of like goes up in a more sort of like linear, it becomes steeper in the sense that the more influence, the more capacity he started to build. It's a multiple sort of, it's a multiple game. That the more influential, the bigger the size of the market, the more monopoly that you have, the more influential you are.
Joss, can you actually go back one slide? Sure. So you have tons of time. Yeah. So, no, to the graph. Yes, there we go. Okay. So, I went to design school at Pratt in New York City, and I graduated in 2007. And one of the very first projects I worked on at my first job at an innovation product design consultancy called Echo Design was working on a full page size touchscreen metal chassis, beautiful, super thin e-book reader. Whoa. For Hearst Incorporated. I think I'm out of my NDA now, so I can tell you all about this. And it launched, it happened, but they launched too late to market and also at the same time too early to market. And I'll tell you a little bit about why that is. So in 2008, they were bringing to market a very expensive device. It was about $700 or $800. It was super thin and had this gorgeous touchscreen on it, but it was black and white. And the iPhone had just come out a year before. So people's expectations for a touchscreen were very different already. People were like, oh, a touchscreen should be super responsive and be in color. And so they had this challenge of how can people respond to an e-ink touchscreen. It was actually a big design challenge for us on the interaction design team to make that work. But we had a huge mismatch in terms of features that we thought, that the company thought people wanted and needed, and what we were providing, right? People were expecting, didn't know what e-ink was. And touch e-ink was really confusing as well. So in a way, we didn't know our ocean well enough, right? And Hearst, at the same time, thought that this was going to be a great way to deliver magazine content. But at the same time, they didn't actually have a ton of magazine content available digitally yet. And then similarly, when they actually finally launched the device, we in the company had been watching and waiting for Hearst to deliver the final design to them. The engineering team had worked everything out. And they hadn't launched yet. They hadn't announced yet. It was like CES already. Like, when were they going to announce? It went by. And then Amazon came out with the Kindle, solved most of the essential problems, had a much bigger ecosystem, and they launched as an also-ran. And so I think when you talk about building capacity, there's being too early to market. When you bring something to market that people don't get because it doesn't match their expectations. You know, they don't want all these things you're offering them. They just want something a little bit better than what they already have. If you give them something that's tremendously better and also tremendously more expensive, it can blow apart their mental model, which is what Hearst did, right? And so when I look at the slide of building capacity, I think they had a too high price point and way too many features that were just literally years ahead of their time. And so I think matching what you have with what people want at the right time in the right place is so important from a product roadmap perspective. Yeah. It was a real lesson for me, honestly.
I think this is actually interesting to, I'd love to hear from you guys of, if you look out in the startup ecosystem in Malaysia, or companies that you admire, I would love to hear some examples that you guys could share about some startups that actually really have navigated their oceans well. Does anybody have any sort of insights to share? Take a moment to think about it. Like which startup in Malaysia or Singapore, or maybe a startup that you really admire, that you feel like, wow, they really know their ocean. They really understand like the right timing, the right features, and the marketplace just responded tremendously. Whether it's like a small, medium-sized business, or whether it's like a large regional one. Does anyone have anything to share? Anyone? Yep.
Well, I think there's an app here called My Taxi.
Yep.
I don't work for them, but I work the surveys.
Right.
And every time, when I use the service, a point make sure I do is I talk to the taxi driver.
Oh yeah.
So for me, it's simple. I use the app, I call it taxi, hopefully shows up, I get to where I go. In Malaysia, a lot of times you have a meter, and you don't use the meter, you want to fix rate, and you just feel cheated when you do that.
Right.
So I was taking my taxi to the airport, and I asked the driver, how do you find my taxi? And he just goes, oh, I love it.
Oh, great.
I love it. And I said, why?
Yeah.
He says, he used to drive around looking for fares, and that would waste a lot of time. Now what he does, he stays at home,
Right.
and he waits for fares to come to him, and he says, I get 3 hours more per day to
Wow.
spend with my kids, and I still have the same or higher levels of income. And because of that, he just tells all his taxi driver buddies, you must use my taxi. And I think they knew that the demand was there because people like this have smartphones and can go and get you a taxi. But I think they really went about it smart way of winning the hearts of the taxi drivers for increasing the supply.
Right. They knew their users and exactly who would like use it.
And they have more than one user. This is what people forget so much. It's like when you build a mobile app, you just assume it's a consumer-facing app, and it's great for people. I can get a taxi. But the back-end interface that the taxi drivers use is what makes it so great for them. If there were no taxis in the system, my taxi would not work very well.
Yeah.
Right? All these people looking for taxis, no taxis there. Making it really good for the secondary user is so important. And that actually goes to like the ebook. You know, is it easy to add my ebook to the Amazon system, right? That back end, am I allowing that environment to grow versus like putting negative pressure on it? People really forget. Almost everybody has a two-sided business model, right? Making sure that there's building that capacity, and it takes time.
But it's also a timing thing, right? With My Taxi, because if they had launched before the smartphone penetration rate in Malaysia was high, so let's assume that this is now back in 2006, before even the first iPhone had come out. I think the first iPhone came out in 2007. Like, if they had launched then, like, how could have My Taxi even worked? They would have tanked horribly and decided, oh, that was a terrible idea, when in actual reality, the timing was right to the market. They knew the frustration levels of the taxi drivers. They knew and understand like the pricing and the bidding and how to actually factor all of that into to serve a very specific marketplace. That's an awesome example. Does anybody have something else? Yes? Yeah, I would definitely say so. The iPad is created this entire new category of sort of mobile like notebooks where people did not want to carry their laptops all the time. People wanted larger screens than their mobile phones, and at that point it was sort of like a very small like iPhone screen. But now there's this entire new category in between where Apple saw the demand for it, they launched their iPad, and there were so many sort of other followers. That's a great example. Anyone else? Any other startups? Yeah. AirAsia. What do you think? What do you think AirAsia did well? Right. Right.
Affordability and creating destinations.
Yep. Awesome. Yeah, I love AirAsia. Like, I take them all the time.
So a really interesting example of reading currents and tides correctly versus incorrectly. I don't know if you guys read recently, there was an amazing article about Boeing versus Airbus. You were talking about this when you were doing planning. So right now, obviously there's tremendous growth in the airline industry, right? So if you look at it year on year, continuous growth. Year on year, more congestion. Right, so what can we do? Airbus basically made the decision, we're going to build a bigger pipeline. We're going to make a fatter pipeline, build more bandwidth. We're going to build a bigger plane. They made something that was about 50% bigger than the 747. And it was double-decker almost all the way through. The wingspan was maybe 25% wider.
And it seems like a pretty logical solution for the challenge of how do you reduce congestion at major airports? And their answer was, build a bigger pipe. Now, the minus of this solution was that most airports did not have the ability to service planes that large. The runways weren't wide enough or long enough for these planes, right? And so when they started to build this plane, which was incredibly expensive to build, they didn't get a lot of orders. They didn't get a lot of people saying, yes, I want to buy that plane. Now, because they didn't get a lot of people saying, I want to buy that plane, right? So Airbus was reading the tides and the currents and the streams. They had a very straightforward solution that required a major change in many components of the ecosystem in which they were operating. And their solution was major airports. People are going to want to do big long-haul flights between big airports like LAX and Heathrow, Dubai, and then take secondary flights around there. But I don't know about you, when I do a search for flights, I always click the zero stop button, right? I don't want to get off my plane and change to another plane and have to lose my bags, right? I don't want to have a shitty meal in an airport someplace, right? I want to go straight to where I want to go. Boeing looked at the exact same currents and tides and said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to build a plane that's actually a little bit smaller than the 747. We're going to build a plane that's a little bit smaller and has the capacity to go further and faster than the 747. So instead of going from big airport to big airport, we're going to go directly to wherever you want to go, anywhere in the world. We'll do that long-haul flight straight off the bat. The minus of the Airbus plane was that it was only profitable when it was almost completely full.
The 747 is like 444 people. The Airbus plane was like 540. And it was only a break-even proposition when you had like 520 people. I don't know about you, but most planes are not full all the time. And so Airbus made a very big bet that was very risky, that required a lot of components to change in their ecosystem. Whereas Boeing said, we're going to work within the current ecosystem, and we're just going to make something that's going to solve the challenge, not by building a bigger pipe, but building a faster, smaller pipe. Totally different solution. And what I love about this example is that both were completely reasonable, backed by major strategies, huge corporations, thinking very hard about everything, right? But one of them was right, and one of them, right now, seems wrong. Now, Airbus may be playing a long game, and in 15 years, some of the larger airports may do some upgrades on their runways, and people will start buying the planes, and their investment, which looks really bad right now, will turn out to be okay. And so I think it's the idea of building capacity, knowing your ocean, such a delicate balance, because you can be wrong. And it's actually really, if you think about scenario planning, I think it's actually a real challenge to say, think all the way down. I mean, now when I tell the story, you think about Boeing, you're like, come on, guys. There were so many dependencies.
It's like the signal and the noise. Like, can you separate out the signal from the noise?
It seems obvious now that, like, oh, this plane will only work if everyone buys it, if it's totally full all the time, and all the major airports in the world upgrade. Right? It's comically wrong now. And if you look back, I certainly would have told them if they were willing to pay me. Like, by the way, guys, don't come up with an idea that requires everything else to change in order for it to work. So obviously, I think it's worth thinking about your own ideas, maybe. How many dependencies do you have? What's your riskiest assumption, right? How many things are you expecting to work before everything goes right for you, right? I think it's like the Hail Mary pass is great, but that's a lot. It's a lot to guess at.
So this is an example of another slide of the same example going back to the Amazon of building capacity is one thing. So actually building the physical Kindle product, the e-reader, is one actually huge set of problems. Building the actual systems and content to support it is a completely separate problem to solve. This is sort of a really interesting example of how many books was actually listed on the Kindle, plotted against time. and how the Kindle actually really just gained a ton of momentum. Again, like I talked about the slope of the line earlier in the last slide. This is exactly the same thing. Over time, the acceleration, like there's now 33,000 and 33,500 books that are being published at the end of April 2011. I don't know what the exact number is now, but I can bet you that is a lot more than that, which is incredible.
Yeah, it's a linear, so it's like 8,300 books per month for a couple of years, and then doubled that rate basically, almost, and then doubled it again actually. So that's
it's very impressive. And I think this is also really important because I know that like there are a lot of, particularly true for marketplace startups, when you're playing the role of the connector between the supply and demand. So I think about a startup like Etsy, for example. They're a marketplace startup. If they did not have enough products and enough individual sort of sellers that will list their products online, when buyers come on and they try and browse Etsy to look for things, whether it's jewelry or whether it's like household products, and there's nothing on there, Etsy would fundamentally not work as a marketplace. So the key question to ask yourself when you're thinking about levers is, what is the tipping point of what is enough that will actually help my product or my service gain traction? And when I say traction, I don't mean like in the startup world, people talk about traction all the time. And people get very, very focused on like, how is my product doing? Like, have I actually built it out? Like, how much fidelity is it? How many features do I have on? But people often forget about the other side of the equation of like, wait, do I actually have the content to support it out? Do I actually have the infrastructure, the organizational systems? Is my back of the house, does it have as much traction as what I'm putting in the front of the house? And it's a constant tension and balance in order to build up your organization in the same way.
So back in May, the Design Gym did a week-long pop-up innovation lab and taco shop called Design Taco. So we were a taco shop by day and innovation lab also by day and by night.
It was delicious.
And it was delicious. Yeah, I ate pretty much only tacos for the entire week. And it was fun. It was actually, so this is a way for us to be a little more innovative with how we, people approach innovation and solve problems. We had people come to the lecture and buy a ticket, and the ticket came with 2 tacos. Right? We have a team buy an innovation afternoon. They would eat lunch over it, because I personally think you solve more problems more interestingly over food. The reason I bring this up, we had a panel where the head of culture from Etsy, our friend Morgan Evans, was there, and the head of innovation from the New York City Schools Innovation Lab called the iZone, and a few other people speaking. And the woman from Etsy, Morgan, who is amazing, it's her job. Etsy is growing at a tremendous rate internally. There's some months where they have 30, 40, 50 new people get hired. How do you maintain a culture in that sort of a situation where you literally don't know everybody from week to week? When we asked her what her vision for the company was, she said, for people to build their own Etsys. And it's really interesting when you look at that growth of ebooks. One of the things that Amazon does so well now is they enable anybody to publish an ebook super, super easily, right? Now it dilutes the market a little bit. There's tons, I don't know if you've ever tried to buy an ebook and like been offered up like weird versions of the book that are not the book. If you were looking for the main book, there's like all these others that are like $1.99 instead of like $14.99 that are like summaries of the book. It's really weird. But this is Amazon's way of opening the gates. Etsy, similarly, the day will come pretty soon where Etsy will make it easy for you to create your own communities, your own store of stores, right? So that they're no longer the ones whose job it is to create the capacity. They allow anybody to come in and build that capacity. It's a very different thing versus like hand importing. I think the first 5 years of Amazon is them pumping the system and priming the pump and building the marketplace. And then it's how can we allow someone else to do it instead of us having to do it themselves?
Yeah, and that goes to how do you actually build a sustainable ecosystem at the end of the day. Daniel and I found this graph, and I think it's actually freaking amazing. The yellow line represents Amazon's sales of physical books, and the red line represents Amazon's sale of Kindle books, which is freaking phenomenal if you just look at it purely from a graph basis of like, I think we just have to have a moment and appreciate how amazing this is
But
that they just understood which levers to pull. Like it goes back to sort of the previous like 2 slides. They knew exactly what to do. They knew that they had to increase the content. They knew they had to build their capacity of their Kindle reader. And all of that resulted in an increased amount of sales.
Yeah, if you go, like, what's funny about this graph is that it is phenomenal. And you're like, good job, Jeff.
Yeah, good job, guys.
Hats off to you. But what it doesn't show is how much work they put in. You know, if you take those graphs and just pack them in there and you think how much work they had to do in 2006.
Yeah.
In 2006 to make sure that the device got to market on time.
Yeah.
In 08. And to start pumping the system full of books and then allowing the market to open up and anybody to bring books onto the system and allow that kind of literally straight up growth. Like it hides, it makes it look effortless. And we all know like the more you practice, the luckier you get, the more you work, the easier it looks. You know, Cirque du Soleil, man, I could do that, right? It looks so easy when you see them do it, right? There's a tremendous amount of effort that went into that overnight success, which is not overnight. It took years and years of work. I should remind myself of that every day.
And I think a flip side to looking at this and seeing, all right, what is actually happening in the world today that the ebook, that the Kindle market is just taking off. And if you were the CEO of Chapters or the CEO of Barnes and Nobles, which are huge sort of bookstores and chains of bookstores in the US and in Canada, I think they have Chapters here, I'm not 100% sure. But if I were them and I was only selling physical books, I would be pretty darn scared right now. And if I'm not reading my ocean, it goes back to scenario planning. It goes back to like like the touch points. What touch points do you have with the outside world as well as within your company? Because if I was the CEO of Barnes and Nobles and I'm seeing, goodness, sale of electronic books are completely taking off. What are we doing to make ourselves relevant in the marketplace? Like the marketplace changes all the time. The landscape that you operate it changes all the time. It's like, how does my taxi still stay relevant when Uber is coming into the market? How are they thinking about navigating all of these different threats? Like, how are they reading their tides and their oceans and their currents? All right. I believe this brings us to sort of an overview of the entire day.
And a lot of Q&A, hopefully.
And a lot of Q&A, yeah. So we talked about for the entire day, like 10 principles, actually, about how do you think about, on the very first part of the day, experience design. How do you think about creating the best experience for your users? And how does it actually link back into the second part of our day, which is systems thinking? Building systems not only within your organizations, but systems to actually keep in touch with the rest of the world and navigate through that. You guys have any questions for us? Yes.
Anything. I'll hand out the mic.
Well, actually, this is a question to you, Daniel. I love your examples of like Airbus and Boeing, and I'm pretty sure that there are tons of smart guys working for Airbus. And right, so like my question is like, why do you think like people come up with this type of, I mean like maybe stupid decisions or whatnot? And what are your suggestions, right, to recommend to people not to make this kind of decisions?
Great question.
Thanks.
Summer.
How can we not fuck it up, right? How can I not make stupid decisions? Does anybody actually have anybody want to offer anything on this question of what do you think went on inside of Airbus that allowed them to make this decision? Any thoughts about that at all? They were thinking bigger is better, right? They were like, there was maybe a momentum within the organization to say like, yes, this is great, bigger is better. Anybody else? Any other thoughts about why Airbus made the choices they made? What's that? Safer. Say more about that.
Weather is changing, especially during summer.
Yes. Oh, so they may have been like, we want a bigger plane because it's actually there's all these other externalities. It'll just be a safer plane.
Yeah, moving forward in the future, I mean, climate change is happening.
Sure.
Impossible. It is just gas.
And then actually, it is a more efficient plane when running full, right? It has 4 engines, and when it's full of people and cargo, it's actually it actually may be slightly greener. So they may have been like, oh, you know what, it's good. When it's full, it'll be a more efficient plane. Cost savings, right? And I saw another hand up here. Why else?
They thought that it would drive
Yeah.
Like iPhone, they introduced iPhone, Apple introduced iPhone, then they actually after the big iPhone.
Right. So iPhone's like, we're going to build this great platform and people are going to rush to it and fill it. Now, they got lucky. Has anybody ever built a platform that nobody showed up at? I mean, yes. Can we think of any examples where people built a platform that nobody came to? You probably can't because we don't know any of them. They disappeared. That's why we can't think of any of them, right? What's that? Google Wave, yeah.
Wave, that's a good one.
Right?
Yeah.
So maybe it's because I have...
What went wrong with that, by the way? I know I hated it.
It was maybe, I don't know, why didn't Google Wave succeed?
It was so polite.
It was overwhelming. And so that goes to like building something that's too far ahead of your time. Yeah. I think, so my background in physics, sometimes I think about fluid dynamics, right? Propagation of momentum through a system, right? They potentially overestimated their ability to influence the market and the rate of change that could happen, right? They said, like, we'll do this, and then that, and then this, and this other thing, and it'll just all go, right? Whereas maybe what they should have been doing is negotiating with large airports years in advance to help smooth any upgrades that they would need to do. I don't know about you, but airports in America take a long time to fix and build. I feel like I walk through LaGuardia and JFK, and it's like they're constantly fixing it. And so I think it's a pretty strange assumption that we'll build this plane and people will upgrade to have it. All right, that's a cart before the horse thing. But I think they were like, we're Airbus.
Yeah.
Who wouldn't want to get on our bandwagon? Any other reasons why we think they may have overestimated with this plane? There's this idea of drinking the Kool-Aid. I don't know if you have this concept here, where it's actually a very horrible. It's a horrible story. It's about a mass suicide that happened in America. We do these sometimes because we're a really stupid country, right? And so they had this. Everybody they were all gonna kill themselves. And they just all had this Kool-Aid that was full of poison, and everyone drank it, right? And so whoever didn't drink the Kool-Aid lived, right? The people who drank the Kool-Aid died. And very often within organizations, we at the Design Gym, we teach companies to have a shared language of innovation, creativity, and capability. And we think that people do better work when they have a shared language of innovation. But the minus of that is that sometimes it can result in groupthink, where nobody is being like, hey, wait a minute, this Kool-Aid has poison in it, guys, right? Oh, by the way, there's a risky assumption. And I think that goes back to Jocelyn's point of omnidirectional feedback versus one-directional or even bidirectional communication. I'm sure there was somebody within the organization who was like, I don't know, man.
Oh, for sure.
But maybe there was just no time to make it happen.
And I think the other point about that as well is like, and it goes back to the entire second part of systems thinking, is that when you think about pushing out a new product or when you think about building a new capability, don't just think about how it would actually change something fundamentally within your organization. Think about how it would actually change something out in the world. And remember how I talked about two-way listening? That is exactly it. If they had the foresight to understand, wait, the runways are not long enough, and that's actually a fundamental thing that like planes have to take off on runways, and know that it actually just did that simple calculation. That is a reaching out into the world system and knowing that was a completely like consequence that they didn't even think about.
Yeah, so that's questioning your risky assumption.
Yeah, questioning your assumption.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
I'm just curious, were there ideas that at the time seemed crazy, but in retrospect seem sort of like the opposite of what Airbus said, or maybe in 10 years' time, when we look back, Airbus might have done the correct thing? Are there examples or ideas that you can think of that show the opposite? Or?
Sure. I have one in mind. I don't know if you have.
Why don't you go ahead first?
Okay, so one of my favorite books, which everybody should read, is called Setting the Table.
Yes.
It's by a guy named Danny Meyer. If you ever come to New York City, you'll probably want to go to a place called the Shake Shack. I don't know if you've heard of it. Yeah, you've been to the Shake Shack. And it started with a little hut, literally in the middle of Madison Square Park, which used to be, I don't know, filled with junkies in the 90s. It was not a particularly safe park. So Danny Meyer had a really big famous restaurant at the one side of the park, and he bid on an opportunity to build a food concession stand within the park. And one of Danny's principles, and you should read the book, it's amazing, is this idea of whoever wrote the rule that, right? So you look at conventional wisdom and you say, well, who decided that that conventional wisdom is true, right? I'm a big fan of prototyping, and he really, this empire of Shake Shack, right? They're sprouting up all over now. Really just started as a tiny little hut. It really was a shack within this park. And this idea is like, whoever wrote the rule that fast food had to be bad food, right? Now we look back and it seems completely obvious. You have Chipotle and you've got Fresh & Co. I don't know what the local brands are that bring sort of fast casual to your market, but in
My Burger Lab.
My Burger Lab, is that a thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Delicious.
And I think whoever wrote the rule that, you look at McDonald's food and everything's a little soggy, a little flat, like over-industrialized. You don't know where the food comes from. Where did that cow grow up? Is it in fact cow? How much is not cow, right? And apparently they're going to open source all the ingredients now, so they're going to they're going to tell. But they've also done the capacity work to remove pink slime from the ingredients list. So there's no fine, lean textured beef in it anymore. So now they can be open about what's in it because there's less bad stuff in it. However, be that as it may, Danny Meyer made the choice, we are going to have free range, organically grown, locally sourced beef. We're going to have like shakes that, oh man, the shakes are so delicious. We're going to like, they really thought through the whole process and they said, we're going to make this a gourmet hamburger, a gourmet French fries, and we're going to deliver it at fast food speeds. Whoever wrote the rule that you can't do that? Most people never did it, and they probably thought it wasn't worth doing. That thing is taken off because he decided to break conventional wisdom. If anybody went to Randy's talk on Tuesday or Wednesday, or Wednesday or Thursday, maybe it was Thursday. It's been a crazy week. I'm sorry.
Maybe it's Thursday. Actually.
Maybe it was Thursday.
Yeah. Definitely not Tuesday.
He talked about how if you have consensus thinking, and so if what you think is true is what everyone else thinks is true, and you build a conventional business, right? And you do an also-ran offering, right? If you believe the opposite of what most people think are true, and it turns out you're right and everyone else is wrong, that's great. You enter into blue sky or white space in the market, blue ocean, right? If you think differently than everyone else and you're wrong, well, you're screwed. You launch something and it fails. But Danny had the opportunity to prototype. Now, it is so much easier to build a small restaurant and test a concept. Food trucks are super popular in the States now because it's a way for restaurateurs to test food concepts, to test product chains and cycles of, can we make this product for this price? Do people like this flavor? Are we missing something in the product lineup? It is much, much harder to prototype and iterate a plane, right? So we can't shoot them in the foot for being in a harder waterfall ocean. They're a waterfall ocean, and they made a big bet. Now, they could have made both bets, possibly. Are they a big enough company to make both bets? Maybe. So I think, and that's maybe why we're not all starting airline industries, right? It's like, I know what I'm going to do. Like, I'm going to start a new airline. Like, that's kind of, that's not something that's not a startup, right? You need to start with a lot of money. So it's a challenge. So I think that's one example that comes to mind for me.
So right now, we have a lot of resources on our website. Some of them are free or pay what you wish. We have a bunch of downloads. You should go and sign up for our mailing list because we send free PDFs all the time about the 5 phases, some details about how they work and what they look like. But the reality is you have to learn by doing. You can't read a cookbook and then be a chef. It's just not the way things work.
But if my personal sort of favorite resources to just sort of keep up. If like you know absolutely nothing at all about design thinking, I actually think a pretty good book is Tim Brown's Change by Design. I think it's the only one that really gives you an introduction overall to what IDEO is and what design thinking is and how to think about innovation. So again, it's Change by Design by Tim Brown, and Tim Brown's the CEO of IDEO. The second one that I really like is Service Design Blueprint. Service design, like I know it's
This is service design.
This is service design, exactly. This is service design. It's a brilliant book. It's actually one of the very few books, and I'm a very avid Kindle reader, is that I would highly recommend that you actually purchase this as a physical copy. It's because it's absolutely beautifully illustrated, and it walks you through like multiple ways to think about service design and how to think about your users, and they have like beautiful like graphs and maps. And then 2 other websites, and those 2 are books. And if you're thinking about sort of day-to-day, you don't want to spend the time to like read those long books, one of my favorite websites is Core 77, which actually Daniel is a contributor to. And actually has a really great, they cover all aspects of design, like sometimes they cover product, sometimes they give advice about like industrial design. There are industrial design websites, aren't they? Like
That's how they started.
That's how they started, but they have sort of evolved since. Oh really?
It started as a thesis
Awesome.
project at Pratt.
Nice, that's awesome. Yeah, so Core 77, 77 is in like it's written in number form, not spelled out, .com.
And if you Google Core 77 and my name,
Yes.
I wrote about design thinking process.
There you go.
Another book, 2 books actually. You should read Danny Meyer's book, Setting the Table, because it's not a design thinking book, but he's a design thinker. He talks about connecting dots, collecting dots and connecting dots, separating research and insight, which we really emphasize a tremendous amount. And actually, the Business Model Canvas book. I actually hate books about design thinking and innovation. But I have. So the Business Model Canvas book at the back, they actually talk about design thinking methods in a very clear and interesting way, and it's a beautifully done book. But hopefully, one day soon, we'll be doing studio projects in Malaysia.
Oh, and wait, one more website, UX Magazine. UX just spelled U and then the letter X magazine. I actually really like that. They have really awesome articles. Core 77 is still my favorite, but if you guys want to just check it out, uxmagazine.com.
This is how you can reach us.
Yes, pretty straightforward.
Pretty straightforward. And yeah, again, if you look me up on Twitter, DA Stillman, I just tweeted the correct link to the slides here at the beginning of the second half.
We believe in open source, so it's online.
It's online, you can download them, save them.
Yeah, share it.
That's it. Thank you
Great,
very much,
and
guys.
that's it. Thanks, guys.